You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. It's Thursday, April 24th. Coming up, while ICE enforcement and immigration reform are at the forefront of Florida policies, we visit classes where thousands of Central Floridians prep for their high-stakes U.S. citizenship test and interview. Also, we learn how a group of Black artists known for their depictions of Florida landscapes in the 1950s is inspiring artwork being done by students across Central Florida today. But first, when you call 911, you expect an immediate response. In a medical emergency, someone's life can depend on it. Well, this week, a Central Florida community lost its emergency department. The doors of the Rockledge Hospital closed yesterday morning after nearly 85 years of serving the community. Months after Orlando Health bought the facility last year, they announced plans to shut it down because of health and safety concerns with the building. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen shares what's next for the coastal Brevard community now living in a healthcare desert.
I'm standing in front of the Rockledge Emergency Department. With the exception of some cars passing by, the coastal breeze, and a few birds, it's pretty quiet. There are no patients inside. They've been discharged or sent to nearby Orlando Health hospitals. But now, Rockledge, a community of 30,000, has to contend with the fact that its community is a medical desert for emergencies.
I've been working since 1982, and this is the single biggest challenge that I've faced.
That's Deputy Fire Chief Jim Wilson of the Rockledge Fire Department.
No, there's no training manual on how do you adapt and overcome when you lose your local receiving facility.
Wilson says EMS transport was able to reach Rockledge Hospital from any part of the community in about 8 minutes. The industry standard is about 9 minutes. Now, the closest Brevard hospitals are in Cape Canaveral and Melbourne, up to 20 miles away. Wilson says transport times will double or even triple.
Is it ideal that instead of a patient going 5 minutes to an emergency room, they now go 20 minutes? No, that's not ideal.
Last year, Orlando Health purchased Rockledge in a deal with Steward Healthcare after the latter filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Rockledge Mayor Thomas Price says Steward wasn't paying its bills or maintaining the facility.
Steward ran it in the ground.
Orlando Health released images of black mold covering basement walls, structural issues, and corroded sanitation lines. None of the photos released showed patient rooms. The hospital says it didn't know the extent of the problems before purchasing. Issues with the air conditioning system were also documented. Orlando Health says the cost to repair and renovate the Rockledge Hospital far exceeds the cost of building a new one. Mayor Price says the community is not only shocked by the decision to close, there's also a lot of hurt.
It's betrayal to the community.
Lee Revere is a public health professor at the University of Florida. She says longer ambulance rides are problematic, but it doesn't stop there.
If the closure of the hospital also basically drives physicians out of the community that may have practiced at that hospital, then you kind of have a tripling effect.
Revere says the loss of a central hub for primary care physicians and specialists lessens the preventative care for an area.
It's not good for the individual, and it's expensive treatment as people get more severe and aren't, preventing some of these more acute illnesses from getting really high level.
According to the city, Rockledge Hospital receives 8,000 patients via ambulance transport a year, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services put the number of primary care physicians and specialists at 283. Health First says it is expected to absorb a lot of the patient bulk, and it's fast-tracking the construction of an emergency department planned for Rockledge over the next several years. In the meantime, Deputy Fire Chief Wilson is concerned about the upcoming hurricane season.
There have been times at Cape Canaveral Hospital when we had a Cat 1 or a Cat 2 off the coast and possibly coming into Brevard. It's a low-lying area, and that hospital had to be evacuated, and they were always evacuated to the Rockledge Hospital.
While Orlando Health has plans to build a new hospital sometime over the next 4 years, it is not said exactly where that hospital will be. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
Joe Mario Pedersen joins Engage now. Thanks for joining us here, Joe Mario.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So were you able to talk to any of the people who worked at the Rockledge Hospital about, how they're feeling now?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I got a chance to speak to Stephen Applegate, the president of the Florida Nursing Association Local 713 union that represents nurses at Rockledge. Initially, he and a lot of people around the community were really excited about Orlando Health having a presence in their coastal community and buying the Rockledge Hospital. That excitement quickly faded once they learned about the hospital closure.
It doesn't make sense. Orlando Health put their footprint here in Brevard County, which we were happy for. We were happy about that. And then but I feel like they put the wrong foot forward. I really do. And just kind of stomped on us a little bit.
Now that the hospital is closed, Applegate is going to focus on improving healthcare in the community in a different way. He runs the Joyful Wellness Center about 5 minutes north of Rockledge, where they provide educational resources to help people learn about improving their well-being. He described his experience at Rockledge as being a bit of a revolving door. So he wants to try and, help out the community in a different way and, still providing that healthy resource, but in a more preventative way.
Okay. And just getting back to his feelings, Applegate isn't alone in how he's feeling right now.
Oh, no, far from it. I would say a lot of people in the community are feeling that way. As far as people who worked within Rockledge, I also spoke with Andrea Hardiman Brown. She remembers being 18 years old and getting her first hospital job at Rockledge Hospital. Brown now works as a clinical liaison for Kindred Hospital Melbourne, though up until recently, her work brought her into Rockledge Hospital regularly. Brown says the loss of the hospital leaves a void sure to be felt throughout all of Brevard for the foreseeable future.
They're going to tear down the place where two of my nephews began their lives. I hate that. It's a place where I started my career, and I have had a very blessed career. But if it wasn't for working there, the things that I learned, the things that, older people taught me, doctors that were kind to me, nurses, other techs, the things that I learned were so valuable for me. For the hospital to close is taking away a sense of part of who I am, part of my story.
So, Joe Mario, as people move forward, just practically, the impact of this closure in Rockledge is going to be felt in the surrounding communities as well.
Yeah. There are the surrounding hospitals that are forced to pick up the slack in Rockledge's absence. What's also concerning to Andrea Hardiman Brown is that Rockledge was one of the larger ICUs in the area. As a clinical liaison, she works with multiple hospital ICUs in the Brevard area.
So I handle Cape Canaveral Hospital, which has 11 beds, Parish, which has 11 beds. No, they have 12. I cover Vieira Hospital that has 20 beds, and I cover Rockledge that has 24. So we are losing 24 intensive care unit beds. That is insane. Where are locations going to go? We can't put them anywhere else.
This closure is going to be felt in several ways. In addition to the longer ambulance transport times, there's concerns being raised about something called wall time. That's the time EMS crews are waiting for emergency room staff to take the patient away from the ambulance and put that rescue ambulance back into service. That could have a trickle-down effect and delay EMS crews responding to an emergency. I spoke to the deputy fire chief of Rockledge, who's really concerned about that, has been trying to work with Brevard County Fire Rescue, as well as some private groups about the best way to bolster fleets. Rockledge and its emergency room also served as a medical partner to Brevard County hospitals in times of disasters, taking on patients at Health First Cape Canaveral Hospital when hurricanes would threaten the coast and cause emergency evacuations too. So there's a lot there that they're considering as we enter this new era of Rockledge not being able to help the community with its emergency resources.
Certainly a lot to navigate in the days and it sounds like years potentially ahead. Central Florida Public Media Health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I should mention Orlando Health is a sponsor of Central Florida Public Media, but does not influence our coverage. If your family is being impacted by this new healthcare desert, let us know. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org or send a talkback on the Central Florida Public Media app, or you can text 833-793-8633. There's more ahead here on Engage. A test and an interview can mean the difference between acceptance or rejection as a U.S. citizen. We visit the Central Floridians preparing for that consequential moment and the volunteers helping them. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, in the 1950s, opportunities were extremely limited for black men and women in the segregated South. Florida's highwaymen turned to painting landscapes to make a living and provide for their families.
Art offered another way out for this group of 26. It was people beating the system by creating art. They weren't trying to pass it off necessarily as fine art. A lot of the paintings were created within a matter of hours.
Coming up, we'll learn about the Florida Highwaymen and an exhibit at the Orange County Regional History Center connecting middle school students to their legacy. But first, as immigration enforcement ramps up, the spotlight has been on people who are in the country illegally. There are thousands of immigrants in Central Florida who are here legally, standing in line, waiting to become citizens. Classes begin this week at One Apopka nonprofit organization to help immigrants in this long process of becoming U.S. citizens. Central Florida Public Media's Rick Brunson was there for the first day of classes and joins us now in studio. Thanks for being here, Rick.
Great to be with you, Sharon.
So Hope Community Center in Apopka has been offering these classes for more than a decade. I'm wondering, how are people feeling in this class, in this climate with the spotlight on illegal immigration enforcement?
Yeah, so as I moved around the 3 different classrooms and talked to people one night this week, there is a little bit of nervousness, but it's important to remember that all 70 people in the class are lawful permanent residents, meaning they're green card holders. They are eligible for U.S. citizenship. That means they have already been in the country for 5 years. They have a job, no criminal record. So generally speaking, Sharon, they are not the people being targeted for removal. That said, there is some nervousness because, as we've seen since President Trump took office, there have been instances where even lawful permanent residents have been detained or have had trouble getting back into the country when traveling abroad. So as I talked to some of the people in the class, there was this real sense of urgency to get this done and secure their citizenship, as they see the present administration seems to be looking for any reason to kick people out of the country, such as having any kind of minor infraction on your record. And with local law enforcement being federalized and quotas being established by the Department of Homeland Security and ICE to achieve these high numbers of deportations to meet the president's agenda, there is a lot of anxiety in the immigrant community, generally speaking. But do keep in mind that, as you have noted, Hope Community Center has been offering these classes for 11 years. This is something they do on a regular basis.
So, Rick, I'm trying to picture these classes. Is this a typical classroom setting, students at their desk, teacher in the front of the class?
Yes. When I visited the center, they had these 70 students split up into 3 classrooms. Each one had a teacher, and it looked like a typical classroom with desks and whiteboards and markers, books and handouts. The teachers are all non-paid volunteers who give their time to come teach these classes. In one room, retired attorney and law professor Robert McIntosh was coaching Aurora Escudero. She's one of his students, and she's an immigrant from Mexico whose husband is already a U.S. citizen. She's been in America for a decade, and she's scheduled soon to have her interview for citizenship with a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services officer. So McIntosh was peppering her with questions to over-prepare her for this crucial moment, helping her to boost her confidence.
My name is Aurora Escudero Chavez.
And why do you want to become a citizen of the United States?
I want to vote. I like this country. This is my home.
How long have you been in the United States?
10 years.
10 years. And your family's here too?
My husband and me.
And you said you like this country. What do you like about it?
Freedom, more opportunity. I like this country. My husband is citizen, U.S.
So how is your teacher, Professor Bob, helping you get ready?
Perfect class. I like class and help me very good, Robert.
Thank you, Aurora. Appreciate it.
The course is staffed by volunteer teachers. Janet Ziomek of Orlando is one of them. She's a retiree from the financial services industry after 40 years, and she decided to do this about 3 years ago. So she's been teaching citizenship classes for the center for 3 years, and she told me that the work is personally and professionally gratifying, and she got emotional talking about it.
It makes me very happy and proud to see these people here. Many of them are not as lucky as me and are retired. They work all day long, and then they drive here, and they sit in class for 2 hours every week for 10 weeks. And that's a very big commitment. And I think it shows how much they really want to be a citizen of this country, which gets me choked up. Sorry.
Janet Zymek teaches U.S. civics, history, geography, and English to the students who are sitting at their desk in front of her taking their notes. And the night I visited, they were learning all about the American flag, the significance of the stars and the stripes and the colors.
Okay. And again, as you mentioned, these classes are to help immigrants who have permanent legal status to gain U.S. citizenship. So these are people living in our Central Florida communities who are taking these courses, Rick.
Yes, and they all have jobs, and they all live and work in Central Florida. I met two of Zymek's students, Jesus Palma and Maria Soto de Palma. They're a couple in their 70s from Venezuela who were taking the class together. They were very, very sweet couple. They've been married 45 years. They've been in the U.S. for 6. It was fun to watch them taking notes together and conversing with one another as they tried to engage with the course content. But yeah, all of these folks work, and they work their jobs during the day. Many of them have families, and then they come at night for these 2-hour classes at the end of the day. It's quite a commitment. I also talked to another student, Maria Romero, who's on the younger end of the scale of the students taking this class. She's a 29-year-old aspiring professional musician and screenwriter. She's also from Venezuela and a graduate of a Full Sail University.
I want to be a citizen. And the United States is a great country, and I'm so grateful that I'm here, and I'm so glad that they open their doors for someone like me who want to, make her dreams come true.
The students are all originally from countries such as Venezuela and Mexico. The center staffer who coordinates the classes, Maricela Zamora, showed me a map at the center that had push points representing all the countries where the students who have completed the classes come from. And you see lots of pins representing students from Mexico, countries in Central and South America, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, but there were also some as far away as Poland.
So, Rick, is this program successful in achieving the mission?
The center has offered citizenship classes for over a decade, and the officials there tell me that more than 2,000 students have taken the class during that time, and 98% of them have successfully become citizens after taking the class. So by their own numbers, they're doing a very, very good job. A 98% is an A in any classroom or course in helping folks become citizens successfully. But what struck me most in visiting the classes were 3 things. First, the dedication of the teachers who've been doing this for years for no pay. Like a lot of teachers, they do it because they love it and they're devoted to the success of their students. The second thing that really struck me was the camaraderie among the students. They really support each other. In one of the classes, before it started, students had gathered to celebrate one of their classmates who had just obtained her citizenship, and they shared a cake that was made out of cupcakes and shaped and colored like the American flag. They took selfies with her. They were really joyful in her success. She had made it, and it's something that they all aspired to. And then the third thing, of course, is just the dedication of the staff at Hope Community Center. It's a nonprofit that has invested in the immigrant community for many, many years. So just seeing all of that in one space was a pretty special thing to witness.
Central Florida Public Media's Rick Brunson, thank you for your storytelling and your insight into these courses.
Thank you again for having me. We're
going to talk about politics now, not what divides us, but what unites us. I'm joined now by Abe Abaraya, a producer with Central Florida Public Media. He is here to talk about the StoryCorps project, One Small Step. Thanks for being here, Abe.
Absolutely.
So before we get into some of the conversations we have coming up, can you just give us a quick refresher on what the One Small Step program is?
So One Small Step is a StoryCorps project. We've been doing it since last July, and we bring people together who have differing political views for these guided conversations. And what that really means is it's not a debate. People talk about politics, and they talk about why they have the views that they have, but they also talk about life and things that kind of bond us all together as people.
Okay, so this week's conversation is a little different. We have two former members of Congress who sat down for a conversation.
Absolutely. And, this is Democrat Val Demings. She represented Orlando in Congress in 2016, and she served 3 terms. During that time, she rose to national prominence as one of the impeachment managers for President Donald Trump, and she was in the running to be Joe Biden's vice president in 2020. She also ran against Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and she did lose that race. Demings sat down with Republican Ted Yoho. He's a veterinarian, and he served in Congress from 2013 to 2021. He was on the Agriculture and Foreign Affairs committees, and he gained a reputation for sponsoring legislation to impose term limits in Congress. And he actually followed his own self-imposed term limits of 8 years. And what's interesting about these two, when they were in Congress, they did not get along.
That is interesting. Let's hear a little now of that conversation.
It gives you and me the opportunity to show that it's hard to hate up close.
If we're not listening, we can never heal this nation. And I think it's so important that we look beyond a political party and ideology and look at what we have. We are Americans, and it is the American ideal, and it's not perfect. It's mainly because people like me are in it. But the principles are the ones that have been duplicated around the world in liberal democracies. I believed in America. I believe in the greatness of America. I overlooked a lot of the things that were done wrong, whether it's civil rights, the slavery issue. You can bring them up. There's a lot that we did wrong, but I still believed in the ideologies. And my alignment in life, and this helped me, was God, country, and family. And some people will say, well, you should put your family first. Well, I'm like, I got to put my country, because if I lose my country, my family's going to be in that much more jeopardy.
I'm a Democrat, but when I hear you talk about your political values, you love the country, God, country, family, I could say the same thing. I love this country.
Okay, so these are two former members of Congress. What's next for them, for their futures, Abe?
It's kind of the elephant in the room, right? Like, what are you going to do next? And Ted Yoho, he actually broached it directly. And just a heads up, the clip does have a little bit of language that might not be appropriate for children.
Are you going to run again?
I'm praying about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm praying about it.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You know what?
You almost ran again.
I did.
Right? For 6.
Well, I was going to run for the presidency this time. But Carolyn says I am 1,000% not behind you.
I could be your running mate.
You could be. Pretty good.
Because you know what happens to family? I mean, when people were calling me a black bitch, my poor sons were just, can you imagine?
Well,
it's so brutal for them.
We've had all of our kids called stuff when I was in Congress.
Yeah, it's just so brutal. But that's probably what Carolyn fears. It's love that has her not able to make the decision. Yeah, the protection. But when you look at that for the greater good. So let me just say this, Ted. We've had a great time here, but people have approached me too about running for president. So we might want to team up just so we can save the friendship.
How? I was just going to say, I'll send you an invite to the White House.
Well, that certainly would be quite the ticket. All right, so let's look past the future of Val Demings and Ted Yoho. What's coming down for the One Small Step conversations, Abe?
Absolutely. So we've been partnering with Dr. Blake Scott at the University of Central Florida. He teaches a course on writing and rhetoric, and One Small Step has actually been part of his class this semester. And so we've had 7 of these conversations done with students from his class, and we'll be airing some of these conversations in the coming weeks.
Abe, any takeaways for you from hearing these conversations with the younger group?
Absolutely. And there were a couple of threads that kind of came out. One is just a lot about the world we're in today with disinformation, with generative AI. It's really hard for people to know what's real. And that came up over and over again in these conversations. and just in general, people saying that there's so much going on in the world today and I don't know enough about topics and issues to form an opinion. So I want to play a little bit of tape. This is UCF student Ambika Sharman. She's 21 years old.
I pour a lot of my time into like school and getting good grades and being on top of my game academically. And then once I get a break from school, once I'm done my homework, I want to watch TV, I want to talk to my friends, I want to do fun stuff. So something that I honestly, like, I know I could improve on is being more aware of, like, more educated on things that I'm not. Like, there's the obvious things. There's things that like I've grown up with when it comes to immigration. That's obviously a huge part of my family and my life. And then, you know, I'm a person of color, things like that. But something that I think I could definitely improve on is becoming more educated on policies.
Another thing I want to mention with these conversations is not to assume things about people. People are a lot more complex than the labels we tend to give them. So I want to play a little bit of tape from 23-year-old Ethan Espenship. He identifies as conservative and says issues like law enforcement are important to him.
A concern that I've had recently is the job market. As you know, I'm getting to that age where we all, you know, college kids, we're all getting to the point now where we have to start looking at a potential career, and you know, this job market's a little nerve-wracking. Like in your bio, I was very big also on animals and the environment. I care. Growing up where I grew up in Jupiter, it's a beach town that it's very filled with fragile ecosystems. If I want to draw back to my mother, I think, you know, having a Danish family, that's kind of where a lot of my liberal ideas come from. I believe in a socialized medicine.
So Abe, what's next for One Small Step?
So we are still accepting signups. People can visit cfpublic.org/onesmallstep if they're interested in signing up for a conversation.
All right. Abe Abaraya is a producer at Central Florida Public Media. He produces these One Small Step conversations between people with different political views. Thank you so much for joining us today, Abe.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, a group of Jim Crow-era black artists known as the Florida Highwaymen overcame the obstacles of segregation and created their own roadmap to success. How their unique portrayals of their surrounding landscapes are inspiring students in Central Florida today. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. In the mid-1950s, black men and women in segregated Florida found career opportunities to be very limited. Most were restricted to manual labor or the lower rungs of skilled work. Around that time, a group of 25 men and one woman formed a loosely structured group of artists who chronicled the natural landscape of Florida in paintings, which they sold door to door or at roadside stands. Their art was well known throughout the region, as seen in many banks, doctors' offices, and municipal buildings. In 1995, they were recognized as the Florida Highwaymen. Bob Beatty is a historian who used to work at the Orange County Regional History Center. Today, he operates a nonprofit that works with museums and historical societies. He's also the author of Florida's Highwaymen, Legendary Landscapes, a record of the lives and paintings of these artists. We asked Beatty to join us to parse out the history of the Florida Highwaymen. The discussion began with Beatty explaining just who they were.
It's a group of 26 black artists, 25 men, one woman, Marianne Carroll, who painted Florida landscapes between really the mid-1950s. The biggest period was the mid-1950s to the early 70s, and then it had a resurgence in the 90s. But it was a very loose collective of people who were self-trained, who painted these idealistic landscape scenes of Florida and sold them door to door, more or less. Some did set up by the side of the road and sell things. The term highwaymen came because they were on the road driving and selling their art back and forth. Some people, it was a full-time job to paint and produce a whole lot of art. For others, it was a part-time job to paint. Some began as salespeople for other artists and then began also to sell their own art. So I knew the story that you would grow up with in the Treasure Coast. I would, they were these black artists who painted these cool things, these cool scenes of Florida, I guess. I mean, I don't think we ever went that far. Turns out my mother's best friend as an adult grew up in Fort Pierce, and her dad was a grocer. And her dad used to take highwayman art in exchange for groceries.
When we are looking at the beginning of this art story, this group of 26 African-American landscape artists, when they first are starting out, can you describe the racial climate in Central Florida in the mid-50s, maybe in Fort Pierce specifically?
The civil rights movement in Central Florida, it doesn't get a whole lot of attention as it should. You know, Tallahassee has the very first bus boycott prior to Montgomery. There is some real trouble in 1964 in St. Augustine when Martin Luther King comes down, the SCLC comes down. But in Central Florida, for the highwaymen themselves, they were all in high school-ish or just out of high school in the mid-1950s. They went to 100% segregated schools. Many of them, the earliest highwaymen, went to Lincoln Park Academy, and that's where Alfred Hare got involved through Zenobia Jefferson. His art teacher at Lincoln Park ends up studying, the only highwayman to study formally. He studies under Bean Backus, who is the dean of Florida landscape painters. What they are copying, what the highwayman art is, it comes from Bean Backus's palette, his art. It's all adapted from that. The opportunity for Alfred Hare, the opportunity for James Gibson, for Roy McClendon, Livingston Roberts, Marianne Carroll, the core original group, and I've missed a couple names, the Newtons, Harold Newton, Sam Newton. Their opportunities in life were very, very, very limited economically, educationally, politically, socially. Things like can go to restaurants but have to go to the back door to be served. And their opportunities, all of them, was mostly going to be labor type work, either labor in agriculture or labor in some sort of domestic trade. Art offered another way out for this group of 26. It was people beating the system by creating art. They weren't trying to pass it off necessarily as fine art. You know, a lot of the paintings were created within a matter of hours.
Wow. So these weren't formally trained artists. How did they hone their craft?
They taught each other and they just did it. The two original, the first two, Harold Newton just was a natural talent and taught himself as best I can tell. He's the one every highwayman says is the greatest. Alfred Hare, also, who died actually before I was born, he died in 1970. Alfred Hare had trained under Bean Backus for a very brief period of time. Alfred taught all of his Fort Pierce buddies, Roy McClendon and James Gibson, etc., Livingston Roberts, and then they were all training each other. They used, instead of canvas, which they couldn't afford, they used Upson board, which is a building material similar to masonite. Instead of frames, they'd use cast-off frames, either from frame stores, or they would go take and get crown molding and use crown molding. That's the paint. I'm looking at my Al Black painting while we're talking here, but that's down here that Dad gave me. And it's a crown molding frame. It's got gold paint on it to make it look somewhat fancy. And it's painted on a really cheap material that they could get.
You mentioned the highwaymen were not all men. Can you talk about Mary Ann Carroll?
Remarkable woman. Mary Ann raised 7 children as a single mother. She worked a variety of jobs and continued to paint and crank out paintings. She is the only woman to have the highwayman designation. She'd sell out. She'd always come with sometimes a smaller selection than she could have sold. But she just kind of held court. Everybody loved her. She was fierce. She just understood how to make it in the world and did. She was a minister, ordained minister, had her own church.
Talking about the recognition, the acknowledgement of these contributions, you have spoken with many of these artists. How do they see themselves and their contribution to Florida's culture?
This is a great question. One thing that I was never able to elicit from the highwaymen, and the reason why is going to be apparent when I finish the story, is I knew they went through some crap on the road. I knew it. Harassment, hassle. They had the stories that they would tell publicly. James Gibson told this fantastic story about getting pulled over in a brand new car And the cop with his, James mirrored sunglasses. James is a great storyteller. So I think the guy went from like 6'2" to 6'8", in the 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years I heard him tell the story. But James would say, I'm an artist. I have paintings in the trunk of my car. And honestly, a lot of times the cops would be like, yeah, right. Come on. Whose car did you steal? Because you're driving a nice car. James said he went back, opened his trunk, showed him the paintings. The guy let him go, pulls him over a mile later and said, hey, the chief is wanting to get some art for the station. Will you come by? And James said, and again, okay, so again, he was pulled over. That recognizes that's not always a safe proposition back then or today. Then he ends up selling art to the cops in the home station, right? So I was like, James, come on. Tell me the story. Oh, here's another quick one. Roy McClendon. These are the level stories I would get. Roy McClendon went to the city hall, gets to one commissioner's office, mayor's office with his paintings. The guy says, do you have a business license to sell? And Roy's like, ah. So he's, goes collect his stuff and leave. The guy goes, no, you leave those here. Roy went and got his business license, came back, and the guy bought a bunch of paintings and he sold there all the time. So, this was like that the relationship that they had. They didn't get as much harassment as maybe musicians would, right? Or they certainly didn't get the harassment that an activist like Harry T. Moore did. He lost his life, right? I think there were several reasons for that. Now, they would tell you, this is what they told me. One is they genuinely liked the art and wanted to help them. Those two things, like it was a part of it. I will add the caveat that they were not threatening to the social order. So that the authorities more or less left them alone. They would not say we were these civil rights crusaders. We tried to stay way under the radar because there was trouble, right? They were there to make money and get out of trouble. As the years went on, the younger highwaymen, not the first group that I was talking about, would let spill a little bit more. I've seen James cry in public, and it's legit. He felt like he and his friends had been forgotten, and James Gibson always called himself an artist.
And who bought these paintings?
Lawyers, doctors, real estate offices would buy them and banks would buy them and give away paintings to customers who were buying their first home in Florida. Housewives. It was everyday people. The first wave of people were, business people in these small towns. If you go over to the, to the coast and just walk around the old downtowns of any of these places, like you'll see where all these offices were, and that's how they do it. They just had their routes. Sometimes they only had enough money to get one way, so they had to sell paintings to get back. Dad used to say he could really negotiate with them. And I think what I realized, and I told him, and I said, Dad, I think they were just trying to get their last $50 to get home to, get on up to Fort Pierce. You were the last one. They were happy to get rid of them, You were lucky because of where you are on their route.
And this was practiced into the 1980s. What caused it to wind down?
So a couple things. The first one was Alfred Hare was killed in 1970. And for the crew in Fort Pierce, that really took the air out of everybody's sails. He was the motivator, the guy. Most of them continued painting. A lot of them, painting was, less of a full-time job, and they would work and paint. James Gibson, for example, seems to have continued painting. We hit a big recession in the early to mid 70s. People started moving away from, downtown areas where these guys could sell. There was a lot of discouragement, and it just kind of petered out. Harold Newton continued to paint and continued to sell into the mid 90s when he passed away. It's funny. They would all tell you, I never stopped painting, but it just kind of petered out. The economy was dropping. People were buying different things. The allure of these paintings was maybe a little bit less. The movement, the artists themselves had lost a little bit of the momentum.
So, Bob, you grew up in Stewart, just south of Fort Pierce in the 70s and 80s. What are your memories of the highwaymen and their art?
My father inadvertently collected highwayman art because when they would come by his office in downtown Stewart, he was just on the route. And my dad liked to have cash. He really did enjoy them. I'm actually looking at the one that survived. Now it's in my basement office here in Nashville.
Bob Beatty is the author of Florida's Highwaymen, Legendary Landscapes. In an effort to connect middle schoolers with the legacy of the Florida Highwaymen, The Orange County Regional History Center gave 6th through 8th graders the lesson plans and art supplies to embrace the styles of the Highwaymen landscapes. The students made their own art depicting landscapes and had their pieces judged for display at the History Center. It's part of a program dating back to 2018. The Highwaymen Kids exhibit runs through May 20th at the Orange County Regional History Center in downtown Orlando. Courtney Burns, Assistant Curator of Education, walked us through the exhibit and explains how the young artists are expressing their views of Florida today.
This program started 8 years ago because the education department wanted to do a little bit more outreach. They wanted to reach out to older students because we felt that there was a gap there. And the Florida Highwaymen is such an important but often lost piece of Florida history. A lot of people don't know who they are until they go and see their artwork, maybe on the second floor of our building, or if their work is on display somewhere else. I know that down in Fort Pierce, there is an exhibit that has a lot of the original paintings. So we wanted to bring some of that history to some of our local schools and encourage the kids to take what they see and impart it with their own experience with Florida, and we bring it here and we put it on display, which I think is a really nice way to kind of wrap up a lesson for the kids.
And walk me through that process of getting the kids ready, even before they start doing this artwork, and just the supplies and the care you take into sending them what they need.
Yeah, so I actually begin the process for this 6 months before they even get their painting. So I bought all of the materials and I started getting everything together last September. So we had 350 kids from 3 different Orange County middle schools participate this year. And I put together individual paint packs. I updated our lesson plans to make sure that they were as factual and interesting to middle schoolers as possible. And I hand-delivered the sets to all of the teachers in early January, I believe, either late December, early January, around winter break time. So the kids started in January. They had about 2 weeks where they learned about the Highwaymen in class, and they learned everything from how they made their paints to how they taught themselves, because they were mostly self-taught artists. Al Black and I believe Marianne Carroll had a connection to a local artist in Fort Pierce, and he helps them find materials for framing because they framed all of their own work, helped them find paint because they weren't allowed to go into certain stores at the time in Jim Crow, Florida to buy their own materials. And they would paint and they would hop on the road and they would sell it to anybody, banks, government buildings, courthouses, people who were interested that saw it while they were driving home on the highway. And after that, the kids learned a little bit more about their painting style. So very quick brush strokes, lots of texture. The paint quality wasn't the best that they could use, but they were really good at layering. So they would start with a background, let it dry a little bit, and start adding in things like the trees, birds, whatever was their focal point of their artwork. And then as soon as that started drying, they put a frame around it, and it was in the back of the car, and off they went. So the kids had about 2 or 3 weeks after that to think about what Florida looked like to them and what Florida looked like to the Highwaymen based off of what they had learned. And they put it together. The teachers picked the 55 top, and they're all up in display.
Even the paint that you picked was intentional. Tell me why that is. And you didn't want them to have dark colors either. Explain that.
Yes. So Highwaymen art is very bold. Lots of oranges, lots of greens, lots of blues. They were often paintings of places that they weren't allowed to go to. You know, there were segregated beaches, there were segregated parks, there were places that they would see on their travels that they weren't allowed to stop in and look at. So they would memorize that, and they painted based off of that. So when I was looking at the paint packs on Amazon, I was looking for things that were mostly yellows, mostly oranges, mostly blues. And that's what I would send out to the schools. I would send out the brightest colored prints. And I really wanted to encourage kids to, you know, not just hide in the background with their art. I really wanted them to put something forward that was really bright and creative, something that they had maybe never done before. I wanted them to really think beyond just an art project at school. I wanted them to think about the legacy of the Highwaymen and what they had to go through, and now these students get to have their artwork on the walls in a similar manner.
So we're in a corner of the Orange County Regional History Center, and we're looking at dozens of artwork and footprints that these kids have done. Courtney, could you just walk me through a couple of your favorites or ones that stand out to you for some reason?
Yes, so two of my favorites are actually right next to each other on the wall. They were done by two boys who partook in our exhibit this year. So the first one is actually not in the style necessarily of a Highwayman piece in that it was like a beach scene or something like a piece out of nature, but it's a fish jumping out of the water with lily pads in front of it, jumping at what looks like a bird. And I really like that piece. It might not be the most technical piece, but I really like it because this child took, what does Florida look like to you? And I look at it and I imagine maybe him and his parents go fishing together. Maybe that's something he does with his friends. And when asked a question like that, his thoughts wandered to something that's peaceful and serene to him, and he painted something based off of that. And right next to that is another piece that, again, doesn't match the traditional Highwayman painting, but it encouraged the child to kind of think about what Florida looks like to him. It's a pier with pink, purple, blues, greens, and it's sunset with rushing waves by it. And I really like that kind of brought them out of the box of what the Highwaymen were painting, because Florida looks different to them, you know. Florida looks different now than it did in the 1950s and 60s. And I like to see where all of the students' thoughts kind of went and see those who kind of push the box because Florida's different to them.
So they're all different landscapes of Florida. Can you talk to me just about the response from students and getting them engaged with these landscapes?
Yes, so I would like to direct you over to one of our winners, because we did have one winner from each of our schools. The winner at the top here has won 3 times in a row, and she has cited in her artist statement that Mary and Carol and the Highwaymen are so impactful to her because she is a young Black artist, and before she did the program for the first time in 6th grade, she didn't know who they were. So she got to learn through 3 years through her middle school career that there were Black artists who created something so beautiful despite facing so much adversity in a segregated Florida, and that really drove the narrative for her piece. So she actually told me that this piece is a little darker than the one that she had won with the year prior because it is her last year of middle school. So it's kind of setting the sun setting on her time taking part in this program because she's moving on to high school next year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was anonymously done, the judging?
Yes.
So it's just, what do you look for when judging these photos?
So there's 2 different panels that will judge. So 350 kids from the 3 schools take part, and each of the teachers picked out about 20 to 25. So those came back to the History Center, and the History Center staff came up, and I completely made them anonymous. So they didn't know what school, they didn't know the name, they didn't know anything. And I put the rubric with the Highwaymen paintings on it, on each of the tables that the paintings were out on, and I said, rank them first, second, and third place based off of this. And basically everyone who works here knows about the Highwaymen. So from the 25 per school, it was down to 3. And then we had a great partnership with a lot of the local art museums, with a lot of the arts and culture programs here in Central Florida. And I scanned all of the finalists and I sent them off to our panel. And I sent them the rubric as well. And I said, rank it first, second, and third place. And these were the winners based off of that.
What's it like for you seeing these kids connecting with the legacy of the Florida Highwaymen?
It's hard to put into words because some of the students are going to have experiences I never will. And I just think it's so hard to, one, grow up in Jim Crow Florida like the Highwaymen did, but then also grow up in a world like today, like these students are. So I got to meet a lot of the students. We had our opening reception on Saturday, and I got to meet a lot of them. And a lot of them just really find refuge in physical artwork like this. And to be able to come in and see something tangible that they put a lot of work and time, and it just kind of brings me, kind of leaves me speechless. For students to kind of have that aha moment and connect something so historical and something that's really so tragic and create such beautiful artwork out of it and really be able to find themselves in it is just something incredibly profound.
Courtney Burns is the Assistant Curator of Education at the Orange County Regional History Center. The Highwaymen Kids exhibition is on display until May 20th on the first floor of the Downtown Museum. Do you have memories of Highwaymen art that you saw growing up in your home or maybe at a local business? We want to hear from you. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org or send a talkback on the Central Florida Public Media app, or you can text 833-793-8633. That's all for today's edition of Engage. Thank you for the company. I'm Sharon Stone. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.